All right, so we got our comparison. We're going down the road here as far as renewable, non-renewable, renewable, or perpetual. Perpetual, as I mentioned before, you can't use it up. Doesn't matter how many solar panels you put up, the sun will still shine, I assume. So that's considered perpetual. Same thing with the wind. The wind is not going to stop blowing even if you set up, millions and millions of wind turbines to harness that energy. Geothermal is also perpetual. That's the heat from the magma and everything, the crust of the earth. That's going to be around as long as the earth is around and in the same way that it is. Now here's the only one here, biomass. Biomass is renewable, but make sure you guys pay attention to this because a lot of you miss this on the pretest, okay? Biomass is, wood is a biomass. They also grow corn for biomass. It's using living organisms, recently living organisms as a source of energy. So like I said, if you burn a piece of wood, that was a tree recently, that's going to give you biomass type energy. On a more technical level, the way we use it now is we tend to grow what we call biofuels like corn or sugarcane, converted into ethanol, and that's what we use in our automobiles. You look at the gas pump when you go to get gas. Most of the ones here in Florida will say up to 10%. What, anybody know? Ethanol, right? Ethanol is derived from it's the same kind of ethanol, the same kind of alcohol that's in alcoholic beverages, and it is derived mainly from corn. Also, sugar cane is used sometimes to do that, but they grow it, ferment it, and use it. And I'll talk about why when we look at that, why we even do that. So it is renewable. It's a biological product. Anything biological is renewable. You can use up too much of it, use it at too great a rate that you can't grow it back, and therefore that is a renewable type energy resource. Do they produce air pollution? For solar, for the most part, no. Wind is a no also. I'm going to use the N there. Geothermal, yes, not very much, but yes, there are gases and everything. When you tap down into the earth, a lot of times you get sulfide gases that come up in the atmosphere and everything. Not a huge thing, but it is definitely a type of air pollution that comes from that. With biomass, that is definitely a yes. You burn biomass, you burn wood, you burn the ethanol that's in corn. That means that you're going to be producing air pollution. Anytime you burn, well, maybe with the exception of natural gas, but almost anything that you burn, particularly biomass stuff, you're going to produce air pollutants from it. Now, what about water pollution? Solar, once again, no water pollution for the most part. Wind, also no water pollution there. Geothermal, yes. Also, once again, kind of a small amount. The thing with geothermal is that if it's very geographically limited, as we'll see. So perhaps if it was more widely spread and used, it might start to present a problem with water quality and stuff. But oftentimes with geothermal, you have to pump that water down into it, use a water resource in order to utilize it. And so that water has to go somewhere, and a lot of times that water gets contaminated when you do that. So that can be. And also, yes, with the biomass, because it's an agricultural product. So anytime you have agriculture, you're going to have water pollution, right? So that's why you get that from that. Geographical limitations. Now, solar, we're going to say no on this with a condition in that it's not as available in some places, as easily used in some places as others. But you can still harness solar. They even have solar panels in Antarctica, believe it or not. Because actually at the poles you do get a good bit of sunshine when, in the right season. It's still not that concentrated. The best areas are deserts and things like that, but you do get, and keep in mind, of course, the polar areas are considered to be deserts. So you can get it pretty much, it's anywhere, but it is definitely not constant. So that's the other one there. We'll get to that in a minute. Wind is geographically limited. Of course, the wind blows everywhere, but you have to have about 12 miles per hour on average on a daily basis, and that doesn't really get met that much. We don't really use wind in Florida, for example. The only areas that are consistently in Florida, consistently windy, are along the coast. Now, Florida Power and Light, which is the biggest Florida power corporation, had proposed at one time, about 8 or 9 years ago, I think, to build and open up a wind power farm on the southwest coast of Florida. But the thing was, they figured out that because it was coastal property, the property values and therefore the property taxes were so high, they couldn't run it profitably. So it's always got to be practical, or it's not going to get used. Sean Gable? I'm good. What's up? All right. No. I got my box, but I didn't count through it, so that's probably what. Yeah, yeah. Whenever. It's not a rush. Okay. Thank you. Bye. Alrighty, so solar is, no, back to here, geothermal. So geothermal is what we call very geographically limited. It's a good source, but there's only certain places around the world that the magma and everything gets that close to the surface. Of course, Yellowstone, you're familiar with that. Iceland is really big on geothermal. They're a volcano, basically, so that makes sense there. But not nearly that widespread. However, as we improve with our drilling technology, which is a big area of research, the areas, more and more areas become available to that. Yeah.
Did you hear about the plan by NASA to like drill around Yellowstone to stop the eruption?
Yeah, I had seen that where they're trying to vent some of the energy and stuff like that. Yeah, I saw that. That was kind of interesting. Biomass is not geographically limited to wherever you can burn biomass and you can utilize it. Constant. Solar is definitely not constant. It's probably your least constant because you're only going to get 12 hours a day on average, no matter where you are. And then for wind, this is also not constant. So some days the wind blows a lot, some days it doesn't. And geothermal is constant. That heat is always there for the most part. And biomass is a constant. So keep in mind, whether or not it's constant is not dependent upon how much you use it and things like that. It just means is it possible to be constant. So if you have enough biomass to burn it, you can continue to burn 24/7, just like fossil fuels or nuclear. That doesn't mean that it's once it starts, it's going to go forever. So just make sure you're familiar with that. So other environmental impacts over here, solar, we got habitat alteration. Biggest problem with solar, environmentally speaking, is that it takes up a lot of space. So if you want to seriously devote some areas to generating solar power, you're going to have a lot of area to put up those. And that's also a practical problem that you see with it in cities and stuff like that. You might think, oh, just put everything on the rooftops. There's not enough room. There's not. You have to have much more area to collect that solar energy because it is what we call low quality, and we'll look at what that means in a minute. You've got the mining and manufacturing. And disposal eventually of the solar panels themselves. This is kind of try to remember those three there because that's kind of a general for any manufactured product that is made from something that is mined, which is the vast majority of them if you think about it. You're going to get materials out of the ground, and you get whatever the energy that's used, and any kind of waste that's produced through manufacturing. And then finally, when you get rid of them, that's going to be an impact because you got to dispose of them. They're going to go to landfill or whatever else. So those are issues to consider there as well. All right, wind. Wind. The big thing is death of birds, bats, other types of flying organisms. You do have what we call habitat. We're going to call it fragmentation. It's a type of alteration. Yes. What's up? What do you need? Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, so we're going to call it fragmentation. It is a type of alteration, but it is one in which there's not a lot of area that is taken up and altered because they typically will put these turbines. The turbines themselves actually have a pretty small footprint. The base of it's not very big is what that means. And the area that it covers is not very big. But since they tend to line them up in rows and you have to put them on ridge lines and things like that, you will tend to make a break in the overall landscape, which we call fragmentation. We'll talk about the environmental impacts of that in another unit, but that's alters the environment quite a bit and has a big effect on a lot of organisms. Roads do the same thing. Roads don't take up that much space, but you put a road through the forest, it completely changes the dynamics of that forest and everything. And same thing is true of wind farms or wind power, etc. That that's the main thing there. We could go into the mining, manufacturing, disposal thing, but I'm not gonna put it up there because it is, it's something that's true of everything for the most part. But those are your big ones for wind power. And then you got geothermal and other environmental impacts. Oh, that's another one. Yeah, I'm sorry. Noise pollution. Which rock and roll is not, apparently. So they produce a good bit of noise, apparently. Has anybody ever been near a wind turbine? Seen it? And yeah, was it noisy? Kind of like
actually pretty loud.
They were saying like the people that live around them get like severe like migraines.
There you go. So there's, pollution does not have to be some toxic substance that you breathe in or drink or whatever else, just the presence of noise and distraction. This is a big pet peeve of mine is noise pollution. Because I can't stand it when you're trying to spend a relaxing weekend sitting outside and, somebody's running their chainsaw all day long or they're, whatever. I can handle a couple of an hour or so of lawn mowing and stuff, but the rest of it's kind of a pain. But so that's that's definitely a problem, and it can actually be a health problem, as you point out as well. So there is a let me see, we got water pollution. It's a water resource use. A lot of times what they do is they will pump, there's an area, they know that there's an area not too far underground, maybe 1,000 feet or so, where the rock in there is very hot, and they will pump water down into it. Now some places they don't have to do that, like Yellowstone. Yellowstone is the way it is with all its geysers and stuff, because it has a massive underground geothermal area, bubble of magma that keeps it hot, but it also has an aquifer that sits on top of that, so it's got a natural source of water coming up. If you've got one that doesn't have that aquifer there available and everything, you need a way to transfer that energy, so usually they'll use water, they'll pump water down, it'll hit that area, it'll get hot, it'll come back up, and they'll harness that energy. Water's very effective at transferring heat energy, so that's why it can be a water resource problem. And they apparently, I guess they rattle and stuff like that, they apparently produce noise pollution as well. So there's that. And finally, biomass. So biomass, it does produce air pollution. It's an agriculture, so you have agricultural impact. So mainly that's going to be water pollution, air pollution, use of pesticides, that kind of thing. You've got habitat destruction. If you're going to put a farm in, or habitat alteration, you can put a farm in instead of a forest or fields or stuff like that. So I think that's pretty much covers it. That one, biomass, environmental impact. So any questions about these points? Now I've got some details. I'm going to breeze through them with you real quick. Point sure points down first. And that would be 4, 7, 3. All right, solar energy. So when you think of solar energy, most people think of solar panels and things like that, but really the biggest use and the most efficient use of water is the natural absorption of solar energy to heat buildings. One of the biggest, the biggest energy resource that is used in buildings, etc. It's usually electrical, but sometimes otherwise, is heating and cooling those particular buildings. So solar energy is very efficient in that, and for many years people have designed their homes, etc., to take advantage of that. Or ironically, it is also counts when you build your home to shield you from the sun, or you make use of the fact, or maybe you make use of shade trees and things like that to keep a building cool when it's in the winter when you're going to have to cool it, if that makes sense. Okay, so basically, passive means it's within the design of a structure. A big part of the energy usage of a building structure, the main part of energy usage of a building structure, is to either heat or cool it. And therefore, if you let the sun help you out, that's passive solar design. And this is a good example of a combination of both. So the building is specifically engineered with its windows and things like that, so that in the winter, as we know, because of seasons and the tilt of the Earth's axis, the sun is actually in the northern hemisphere, or whatever hemisphere it's winter in. During the winter, the sun is lower on the horizon. So therefore, with these eaves set like that, you can see that the sun comes directly into the windows, and that's good because that's what you want. In the summer, on the other hand, you don't want that. So the sun is higher in the horizon, from the horizon, and therefore that eave there, that ledge that's built out, or the roof part is built out there to block the sun from doing that. Some other things. Once you get that, the other things, and this was one of the questions on the pretest that talked about the greenhouse effect. Now, you guys may not know what the greenhouse effect is yet. We haven't really talked about that. But that's just basically the way the energy goes into a structure like a greenhouse, and it has enough energy to go in, but because it bounces around on the inside, it doesn't have enough energy to go back out. And that's actually what you want if you're going to use the sun to heat your home passively, is you want it to come in first, of course, so it's a lot of window exposure. And there's a term you would hear if you lived up north, that it's a real estate term. They'll say good northern exposure. That's because in the winter, the sun's going to be more coming from the north, so you want plenty of windows on the north side to get that solar energy when it comes in. Then once it's in, you ideally want to be able to trap it. That comes in the place you see here, thermal mass wall. Basically, it's a surface that once it gets in there, it will absorb that heat energy and hang on to it. And then the other part of it is insulation. So if your parents, or if you're talking about the house and stuff like that, you may have heard them talk about how important that is. That because they're paying the power bills, so that's why it's so important to them. But that is basically, the fiberglass and other things in the ceilings and in the walls and things like that. So once that energy gets in, it doesn't get back out, sealing up the leaks and everything around the house and those kind of things. Same thing in the summer with cooling, except for the fact that you don't want the heat to come in, so you want to keep it out. But if there's cold air that's being pushed into here, that insulation will keep that coldness in as well. So those are all factors of passive solar design, and it has to do with the building structure. Ironically, we're actually going backwards on this. Like a number of things I mentioned in agriculture, we're kind of going back to the old ways. Before people had air conditioning and heating, they built buildings and homes in such a way that they would maximize and minimize. If you see a lot of the old Florida-style homes with the wraparound porches and things like that. They didn't just do that because they like to sit outside and look at their neighbors, but it's a cool place to be. And if you've been in one of the old homes, they will typically have the low-hanging eaves because we get a lot. We just want to pretty much in Florida just keep the sunlight out, so they'll have low-hanging eaves over the windows. There'll oftentimes be a back door and the front door are directly in line with each other. When you go through the house, it has that structure there because you can open up the doors and get lots of ventilation and things like that. And they're designed to actually, if you go into one of the old ones in the summer and they don't have air conditioning, it's actually relatively comfortable. It's not a baking 90-something degrees. It's maybe low 80s, but you can adapt to that and it's better. And of course, they're not paying hundreds of dollars a month for their AC bills in the winter. But that's passive solar. It's all about the design of the building, maximizing the sun's energy for heating in the winter and minimizing it in the summer. That just kind of is some more detail on that than what I just talked about. Another thing, as you can see here, is trees. This is very convenient in that in the summer when you want shade, the trees have their leaves. But in the winter, when you don't want the shade, then they use a deciduous tree there, and therefore you won't have shade, which is what you want in the winter. You don't want to have the shade, obviously. So there's more of that, and then there's the other type of thermal absorption, solar energy. So that means using just the heat of the sun, and that is in the form of what we call active. And this is what you'll be familiar with. This is probably the most used solar energy here in Florida, for example. or particularly you get into some of the southern states that get a little bit colder. And this are these big black flat things you see on people's roofs that they have pools. Typically is what this is used for. Some people use it elsewise. Mr. Creech, for example, has a home solar power water heater system. And the use of directly of the heat of the sun is much more efficient than converting into electricity. So typically you're going to have a collector, and it's going to absorb the sun's energy in one area and then move it to another area, because of course the two are not always the same there. So that's what makes it active. Typically we'll have a pump on there, and this is the reason why it's not as efficient as passive, because you have to use energy to power the pump. And the second thing is, whenever you transport energy along the way, some of that heat's going to dissipate out through the pipes and stuff. You want to insulate things, but you're going to lose some that way, so that reduces efficiency as well. So works well, but not as efficient as just plain passive solar design. And then this is what most people are familiar with. This is what we have, the panels that are on the building 6 over here, and also the ones that are over by the auditorium entrance. They convert solar energy directly to sunlight. This is good because it gives you a source of electricity, which you need for a lot of applications, obviously. But it is the least efficient way to utilize solar energy. Solar photovoltaic panels, they're constantly being improved. Remember I said that there's a lot of opportunity in alternative energy. This is one of them, how to make solar panels more efficient. So this is a basic thing. Basically the way it works is the energy of the sun pushes the electrons. Solar panels are made out of silicon, like computer chips, which means that as a semiconductor their electrons are kind of loosely held, and they are designed such that the solar energy can actually push the electrons to the other side of the panel, and then they want to get back, being electrons, so as those electrons flow back, you can utilize that desire for the electrons to get back to where they started as a flow of electrons as electricity. So that's the basics of how it works, a very thumbnail sketch of how it works. And then we have some new technology, as Mr. Waterbury mentioned, the solar power towers. These utilize the ability to focus sun. If you've ever used a magnifying glass to focus sun, it's the same concept. Basically, you can bring all the energy, if you make it correct, it's called parabola. And if you aim it right, you can focus that energy, and this collecting area up on the top of these towers gets up to about 600 degrees Celsius. So that's plenty of energy to boil water, and if you boil water, you can run a steam turbine and generate electricity. So that's how those work. Kind of a new technology, more efficient than the photovoltaic panels, but this is expensive. Mirrors are incredibly expensive. Those, they're tens of millions of dollars at least to start these things, and so there's a lot there, but they are being done, they are being developed, and so that's another type of solar energy, the way we're utilizing it. And some of the drawbacks: solar energy is very intermittent. It's the most intermittent. Once again, only 12 hours a day. So if you have an intermittent power supply, if it's only available part of the day or part of the year, whatever, then you have to store it. Okay, so typically, this is a part of the process also that is not very efficient. You lose energy that way. We will talk about the use of hydrogen as a storage and transfer element later, but that's, I believe, going to be what's replacing typical batteries in that area. But you will have to charge it then. Does anybody have these little solar lights that you got stuck at your house, like in the driveway and things? Those have a battery inside them and a little solar panel on top. So during the day, that solar panel is actually charging that battery. Then at night, of course, the sun's not there to charge to run the lights, so they're actually working off the little light. And if you ever come out early in the morning, most of the times they'll be dead already. They don't usually last through the night. But that's the same kind of principle. Power up the batteries during the day, run off the batteries at night, kind of thing. So energy storage is an important part of any kind of intermittent energy supply. It is diffuse or low quality. So make sure you understand this quality term. With energy, quality means how concentrated it is. Okay? So solar energy is not very concentrated, and that's a good thing because otherwise you go outside and get fried. So you have to collect a lot of it. You can see the size of the solar farm here, and that has both environmental impacts and practical implications as well. So that's another reason why you want to make these things more efficient, so that they they don't have to take up as much space. You can use a smaller panel to get the same amount of power. Okay. And we'll go there. And then wind. Now, wind is fastest growing and can be very profitable. Anytime you have profit, then that is, that's going to drive things. It is geographically limited. It shows you the areas in the United States where they use wind power. Of course, a lot is this funnel effect. The Great Plains states, as the wind comes down, cold winds comes down and funnels between the Appalachians and the Rockies, you get a nice constant wind supply there. Other areas like the mountain ridges and coastal areas also work well. A lot is being put into offshore wind farms because you're not really using that as real estate, and you do typically close to shore because the land and sea temperature differences, you typically have a constant wind there, and therefore those are areas that can be utilized. It is intermittent, just like solar, so same thing. You've got to store it if you want to use it 24/7. And as you might imagine, it has been shown to impact birds, bats, and other flying animals, both killing them or causing them to reroute their migration patterns, which actually can be the same thing as killing them. Because when birds or other migrators are set off their path, a lot of times they'll starve to death. Because it's like driving a long road trip and you have areas that have food, usually wetlands, and if they miss those, then they just, like I said, they'll starve to death. All right, they're pretty loud. As mentioned here is a little thing on them. Apparently, I guess, depending on how close you are to it, can go up to the sound of a vacuum cleaner, or actually a lawnmower there at the end. So. All right, and the geothermal, utilizing the energy from the magma of the Earth. It is very geographically limited. As you can see there's only a few places there in red where they're actively used. In blue, I believe, have potential for use and maybe somewhat there. Water resource usage releases noxious gases and is noisy. And then biomass. Now, biomass is your original energy resource. This is probably still the most widely spread type of energy resource. Living organisms, through the process of photosynthesis, store energy. And so it could be burning wood, animal waste for a long time. Here you can see Russian women stacking dung. That's always a nice thing to see. And even garbage. So that is a benefit there from that. But it is like anything else you burn, it's going to produce this. It's going to produce a lot of air pollution from it. Actually, more. In many cases, more air pollution is produced by burning biomass than by burning fossil fuels, even coal. Even coal is notoriously dirty. Has more carbon in it than a piece of wood does. So it's more polluting actually to burn a piece of wood than it is to burn a piece of coal, excuse me. So these are some of the things. Corn, sugarcane, algae even is grown. You can see that down in the bottom right. Those are algae farms. And they have to be converted into a usable source. So the big thing for biomass here that makes it something that people will use is that most of the forms of it are readily usable in transportation. So remember I said this is a big thing. This is what drives our major use of fossil fuels, is the fact that we're driving around trucks and planes and boats and cars, obviously. And most of the other sources will not work as an energy source for these vehicles. Gasoline is actually a very good portable, convenient usage of that. Biomass as well. Ethanol can be used almost, if you're E85, that means you can use up to 85% ethanol. Most vehicles can take up to 10%. And so there you have it there. But there's simply, if you guys read or watched the video on fossil fuels, they figured out, like I said before, early on in the Industrial Revolution that there wasn't enough biomass on the earth, the face of the earth at any given time, to fuel the energy needs for locomotives and things like that. So that's why they had to go underground and dig up coal and other things that had been built up over millions of years. Okay, so think about it this way: if you're going to start using these things, we're already I wouldn't say maxed out, but most industrialized nations are pretty close to capacity on agriculture just to feed people. If you're going to add to that, and that has been shown actually when we've started to phase in ethanol in the gasoline in the 90s. I take that back. It was mid 2000s. It had an impact on food prices and things like that. So there's only so much available that you can do. You do get air pollution from burning, a lot of air pollution, and in particular, they've seen that a lot of developing countries, which are using wood and stuff like that, and even dung for heating and cooking, that they have a lot of respiratory problems and stuff because they're inside breathing that stuff in. So that's an issue there as well. Now I want to talk real quickly about carbon neutral. Actually, a lot of you guys got this right, but I want to reinforce this idea. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is considered to be a bad thing because it's potential to affect the climate. That's what the whole big controversy there is about, our whole big concern there is about that. Every organic substance you burn produces carbon dioxide, whether it is fossil fuels or it is ethanol derived from corn. They're all going to produce CO2. When you use fossil fuels, you're releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere that was stored up underground. When you grow food, like corn, to do that, to use for a fuel, it's going to absorb CO2 as it's growing. That's what photosynthesis does, right? So it's going to absorb that as it's growing, and then you grind it, process it, etc. Then when you burn it into your car, you will release that CO2 back in the atmosphere, so you don't actually increase by using biomass fuels. Technically, as long as it's recently built, grown, excuse me. So that works for corn and stuff. Doesn't work for wood. Most of your trees have been around for decades and stuff, so you're actually increasing past what it would normally be. But if it's like on a yearly basis, it's considered to be what they call carbon neutral. It doesn't really increase the net amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. So that's a good thing on the case of biomass. And I think that's pretty much it. Any questions? Alrighty, so be familiar with those.